One thing is very clear: we shouldn't overestimate what development cooperation can really do. It is a contribution, but it's not the solution to all the problems which are in the world.
For decades, billions of dollars have flowed into Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Uganda, among other countries, in the name of development aid.
And yet, millions are still hungry.
In fact, George, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, says that between 2020 to 2024, Sub-Saharan Africa topped regional allocations with 26.6% of the total official development aid.
And despite this goodwill and financial aid, the World Bank says extreme poverty in Sub-Saharan Africa remains the highest in the world. So the real question is not just why does the crisis persist, but whether the system itself is designed to keep it that way.
And on the streets, people have their own answers. And these answers are far less diplomatic.
Who benefits from foreign aids are the people who are giving the aid and the African leaders.
That is a blunt assessment there, but it reflects a growing skepticism across the continent. So how can African nations break loose from the cycle the aid system has created?
And what if aid is not just about support, but also about control?
And that raises a deeper question. Is development aid helping African countries stand on their own, or quietly shaping direction that they take?
I would say the US and also some other governments have used development cooperation in a very political way. Germany also, but to a lesser extent.
So can nations like Nigeria, Uganda, and Zimbabwe survive without aid? That is our conversation under the Baobab.
We promised that we'll be here, and here we are.
Yes, here we are, and today's topic is very important than my name, but my name is Okachi, and I welcome you under the Baobab.
And I am Mefo Newuh. Here under the Baobab, we always break complex issues. We make them very personal because behind every policy that you see in Africa are real lives, real struggles, and real consequences.
I like how you put it, actually, Mimi. And today we are asking difficult question. After decades of development cooperation flowing into Nigeria, Mali, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Uganda, Cameroon.
Yeah.
Why are millions still facing extreme poverty and, hunger?
That's a very important question because despite how, development aid is coming in, different organizations helping people, there's still food insecurity in some of these countries, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, that's very true, Mimi. And to discuss this topic today, we are going to be joined by Welthungerhilfe, Secretary General Matthias Mogge. Mm-hmm. He has spent nearly 3 decades inside the system. I mean, he's been working in the humanitarian, sphere for a very long time.
Right.
And his organization itself has been, in the picture for the last 6 decades, 6
So when
years.
you say Welthungerhilfe, it's not everybody who understands German.
I think Welthungerhilfe, in short, Welt stands for world, Hilfe is help, and hunger is hunger.
Yes, so we can already see that it actually means World Hunger Aid. And aid means building resilience.
Yes.
Is it like building resilience or making sure that these countries that are receiving the aid continue to depend on the organizations that are helping them, like Welthungerhilfe, have actually saved lives in many parts of Africa? Yeah,
definitely they've saved lives, and we should just to update our listeners and viewers that it is an organization that started way, in 1960s, and they were operating in Mali. And actually, the first, initiative they undertook was, building a fish pond or a fish, processing factory in Mali. I wonder if that exists to date. I'm more conversant with it because I have a friend who works for the Welthungerhilfe, and he's been there for also a very long time.
Right, and they also operate across the continent, like we said earlier, from Ethiopia to Sierra Leone. And we also know that in 2024, Welthungerhilfe invested over 224 million euros into African projects, making them a heavyweight in the humanitarian sector.
Yes, and maybe we're talking about large-scale rural development. In Sierra Leone, as you've mentioned, for example, their support for cocoa farming was massive. And at some point, I think they were the top, farmers who were working under them were the top cocoa producers before the Lebanese came to Sierra Leone to take over the business. Yeah.
And the question always is, despite these heavy investments that we are seeing and hearing, many still feel the needle hasn't moved enough. They are not feeling the impact. There's a huge gap between, the project goals and the reality on the ground. For instance, you've mentioned like local cocoa farmers. Many of them remain very vulnerable when it comes to global price shocks because the prices that they get to sell the cocoa on the ground is completely different from what we see in the world market, and they don't get to benefit enough.
And if you speak to the Welthungerhilfe chief executive officer, he may say that, of course, they've made progressive steps into their projects and engagement with farmers. But also, when we're speaking to people on the ground, they are giving us different scenarios and different stories altogether, and this leaves me in a position to wonder: are people just complaining, or what is happening?
But also, like, to ask concrete questions like, what are they really doing in countries like Sierra Leone, and how much impact are they creating when it comes to hunger? Let us hear what he told us.
For a certain extent, I was very, very proud that we went into the cocoa production, because I saw this is a huge potential here in the country, the cocoa production. But the cocoa plantations were in a very, very poor state. Throughout the Civil War, they were not maintained, nobody was taking care for it, there was no market. So we invested quite a lot together. And at that time, we were applying for a grant from the European Union. For that to happen, you need to pay, or you need to contribute 25% of the overall amount of money you are investing.
Well, Matthias, to clarify to our audience, are we speaking about the matching fund requirement where your organization, Welthungerhilfe, commits 25% of its own resources to unlock these large institutional grants?
Yeah, but normally we do it through private donations. So people in Germany, for example, they give us a donation, 10 euro, 100 euro or so on average. In this particular program, there was a Dutch-based company called Theo Brommer who was importing organic cocoa, organic stuff from various countries. It was a big company. And they said, we are interested in Sierra Leone cocoa production development, and therefore we give you the money. I think it was about 350,000 euro. We are giving this to you, you're giving it to EU, and then EU is matching. So that was a big amount at that time, I think 2 million or so. And with this 2 million, we started improving the cocoa production. And I had no idea about cocoa quality criteria. I learned this throughout the time. And what I saw today, I could really see, big improvement here, big improvement. The quality of the beans, much better.
And how has your intervention facilitated the transition for local growers, moving them from subsistence level farming towards becoming viable, market-oriented commercial actors?
First of all, I would say there is still a lot to do, and there is still a long way to go. We contributed first by having very dedicated, very good technical staff who understood the technicalities of better agriculture, marketing, etc., etc. That was the first thing. In the second phase, we worked more with national partners, with Sierra Leone partners, who also developed throughout the time. Today, we work almost only with Sierra Leonean partners. If you ask me how we did it in an iterative way, gradually. We were learning, they were learning, we both were learning from each other. And this is how we evolved together.
And Matthias, if we look at data, can you provide a before and after snapshot? How has your intervention benefited a Sierra Leonean farmer under your program in terms of, yield or income?
No idea. Sorry, I was not prepared for that question. When I talked to our country director today, my colleague, He said, yeah, Matthias, we were the number 1 NGO working in cocoa production in Sierra Leone. Now we are number 2 because we have stepped down a little bit. The market has become a little bit complicated, but we were number 1. So therefore, I guess we were a big contributor. I wouldn't say, that we are part of the market or so, because the market is dominated very clearly by the Lebanese who are here in Sierra Leone. They are dominating the cocoa market. And, we are not creating here a parallel structure or so.
I was really enjoying that discussion between you and Mr. Matthias Mogge. Yeah. And I could hear him really emphasizing that aid must be community-led to be impactful and relevant. And there's a big shift happening now towards sustainability. There's always that idea of, can it continue? Can the aid last even when the NGOs go? Yes. That's always the big question.
Yeah, and I like the keyword sustainability. And I think that is where everybody and every expectation is drawn towards, that it must be sustainable at the end of the day. Because if it is not sustainable, then it, breeds the over-reliance. And it is a story that we keep on hearing. I'm sure you've heard about, development aid since you were born, maybe.
Right, I've heard about it, but I've never, in fact, we've heard that some things have been sent to our communities when I was growing up by the UN, by some of these, international organizations, but like to really feel the impact on general impact. I've not really felt that. And that's where the big question comes in as to whether there is proper management at the level of local governance, whether there's that political will to make it beneficial for the local population. And
more fundamentally, Mimi, is, the question of over-reliance. And we've seen what has been happening, in the recent past, in the way of, the US aid, being cut off and sending shockwaves across, most African nations, whereby the health systems are collapsing. People are losing their jobs. Right. And it shows you how dependent, some countries were to this development aid.
And it brings me to this question because I was quite curious to find out whether some of these donors, these donations are just are they political tools, or are they really there to make sure that there is true partnership between the donors and the countries, and that it transforms into something really positive for the respective communities? Is that something that you ask our guests?
Yes, and it is not just the conversation in African countries. Of course, we should emphasize on that. Back in donor countries, taxpayers are also asking, their countries very hard questions. Their economic pressures. They're asking, what is our money doing? Is it necessary for us to send this money to this particular country? And they want to know, is the money leading to lasting systemic change? And that is the question we asked Matthias.
What I have observed here during the visit was that apparently the ministry is searching for ways to convey in a better way to the German public what we are actually doing with German taxpayers' money. I think this is very fair and very good, so that there is basically more support for the politics of herself, but also from the BMZ.
Now, there is a growing chorus of skepticism both in Germany and globally, suggesting that despite decades of trillion-dollar investments, the tangible dividends on the ground remain unseen or below expectations. How do you reconcile that critique with your mission, Matthias?
I think there is a lot of progress. And Welthungerhilfe is publishing every year the Global Hunger Index, which is measuring the hunger in the world. And you can see very clearly that hunger was going down until 2015. The hunger was going down very sharply because conflicts have increased a lot. In the last 10 years, conflicts have doubled. That's one big factor. The other big factor is climate change. And then COVID came, financial crisis came. So shocks which hit the poorest countries most. And therefore, quite a few of the gains, quite a few of the progress we have made was reversed again. Yeah.
Critics argue that there are more effective alternatives to the traditional aid architecture. Is the German government and, by extension, your organization, Welthungerhilfe, truly open to exploring these disruptive models?
One thing is very clear. We shouldn't overestimate what development cooperation can really do. It is a contribution. I said that always and always again. It's a contribution, but it's not the solution to all the problems which are in the world. We can support certain initiatives of people. We can be there when countries are in crisis and so on and so on. But we cannot solve the world with development cooperation. This is impossible. And you're absolutely right. We should more explore alternatives. For example, we should work more with the private sector. I think in the end, it is a private sector which makes a country running, which gives employment to people, which can also ideally generate taxes, which goes to the government, and government can pay social services for the people.
And I mean, Mimi, that is a no-brainer. If the economies are not functioning, then the overdependence on aid, it's a continuous, occurrence. And Matthias admits that there is a need of, a paradigm shift in how development cooperation is managed.
And I was also very happy to hear that the German taxpayers were also asking for accountability. They want to know what is being done with the money that is, given to organizations like Welthungerhilfe to send
to help alleviate hunger,
in other African countries, because there's always the question about whether is it creating any meaningful impact? Is what is being done with the money? Because on a daily basis, they have to pump in money to some of these African countries, and the impact is really not being felt. It's
a continuous, occurrence. And the other day under the Baobab, we are discussing about 35 million Nigerians risking, undergoing hunger in this particular year, and that would trigger, more over-reliance on more requests for support. So, what has the aid that Nigeria has received in the previous years been doing to alleviate, such a situation? That's
also a question certainly that Nigerians are asking themselves. Someone who is also watching maybe from Cameroon will be questioning. So Welthungerhilfe actually assists people in Cameroon, in Kenya, in Sierra Leone, but are we really feeling the impact? Which is why we had to take our microphones as well to the streets of Nigeria. Our correspondent, Abiodun Jamiu, spoke with some of the people in Nigeria to really find out whether they are feeling the impact of some of these organizations and systems.
The African populace does not benefit from the foreign aid. Who benefits from the foreign aids are the people who are giving the aid and the African leaders, because the people who are giving out the aid get recognition from the world that they are supporting poorer countries, while the leaders of Africa, mostly this money's funds that come to Africa as foreign aid are transferred back to those foreign countries. So the aid actually promotes corruption within African countries, and it also promotes laziness within the African countries.
For instance, Nigeria have 90% enough resources, to provide food, shelter, and everything. But why are Nigerians still dying of hunger? It is nothing but a pure greediness and corruption.
I would say Africa has real development challenges, so targeted aid can help in the short term, right? I do not believe that ongoing development aid from developed countries is the major solution that Africa needs in the long term.
I'm glad to get those mixed reactions from Nigeria, which is
enriching,
right. So if billions are being spent, why do many people still feel like nothing has changed in terms of, alleviating poverty and solving the issue of hunger?
And our listeners and viewers may admit also it comes down to accountability. And we've had Nigerians talk about that as well. Is the failure with the local governments or with the international systems, that drive these interventions, Mimi?
Matthias, our guest today, has spent over 20 years in this sector, actually, and he's seen the breakthroughs, but also the limitations. We've heard him talking about it, of what some of the NGOs can do, if the political environment is broken, and what they cannot do.
It draws us back to the real problem, and if you look at it, the real problem is the politics. It's the corruption that we're talking about, and it has been overemphasized by the Nigerians we spoke to, and I believe this is a sentiment shared across the continent.
It's so shocking to see that a minister who is in charge of humanitarian affairs, or a minister who is in charge of the welfare of citizens, is being sent to prison because they have embezzled millions of dollars, and they are currently in detention.
And selfishness, yeah.
So they want to keep the money to themselves, and that's where the scrutiny comes in, not just for governments, but also for organizations like Welthungerhilfe, because if aid continues to operate in a system where political will is missing, then we are treating the symptoms and not the problem itself.
Yeah, and that raises another uncomfortable question. Has development aid, in some cases, become the part of the problem? And have countries used development aid as a tool for soft power?
A little bit, yes. I would say the US and also some other governments have used development cooperation in a very political way. Germany also, but to a lesser extent. Germany was not that politically driven when it comes to development assistance. The US very much, and they used it very much as soft power, very clearly. There are many, many examples for that. Also other countries, like the UK, also France is using it very clearly as a soft power.
Matthias, if you were told to point out, what are the most promising structural reforms currently being debated within the German corridors of power?
It has been just released last week, and it's still a little bit vague, I have to say. But there are some elements in there which I find interesting. For example, is the private sector is very clearly mentioned. Working on conflicts is clearly mentioned. Hunger, poverty, inequality is clearly mentioned. Partnerships is very clearly mentioned. And maybe most importantly, they are saying self-critically, we have to change the way we are working. It's not only about we need to be good to the world, or we have to help the poor country because this is morally maybe intended. No, they say there is an interest of Germany investing in development cooperation. I think this is honest, and I think this needs to be expressed more clearly also to the German public, that it is also about our interest in Germany being engaged in many countries of this world, also the poorer countries.
Yes, Mimi, before you go for it, there is this, term used in the development cooperation, sphere, poorer countries. I would prefer to use it sparingly.
Like developing countries. I would prefer
That sounds
developing
better.
countries to poorer countries. But I think some African leaders have normalized that appellation.
Yes.
So poorer countries is okay because it gives us access to the development aid that we need. But also poor, to say someone is poor or poorer is quite relative, because is it in terms of money or resources? Because when it comes to resources,
then it is richer.
Africa is the richer one. And also there's this, what he was saying about Germans really insisting, we want to know what the money is
Accountability
used
question,
for.
yes.
And we also see Africans asking, we want to know how this
So where
money
is the
coming
money?
in.
Where is the
Where
money?
is the money? So in between, there's a big question mark,
Yes.
We need answers, and maybe subsequently we'll find out what is really going on. But there's also something,
Yes.
now that we're getting into the rapid fire question segment,
Yes.
about Mr. Matthias that many people don't know.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. We are getting into this moment where we normally retreat to the shades of this beautiful tree to get to know our guest beyond, his humanitarian, activities or his portfolio. And Matthias Mogge is also part of a band.
Yeah.
White Wave it is called. And he's the second lyricist and a songwriter of all
If this was an infotainment program, I would have loved him to kind of do some performance for us. And somehow that made us quite curious, because behind the policy debates, the numbers we are hearing and funding models, there's a person with a completely different rhythm, you know?
Yes, so we thought before we wrap, let's step away from, aid for a moment and get to know the man behind the mission.
Here is the rapid fire question segment.
For a moment of quiet reflection, do you prefer the serenity of the coasts or the spirit of the highlands?
Beach.
Deep inside your heart, Matthias, do you see yourself as a farmer or the money person?
I'm a beekeeper, farmer, so to say.
Chocolate or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Football pitch or tennis court, where is your heart most drawn towards?
Football.
And how about reading or watching series?
Reading.
Of all the borders you've crossed, which nation has left the most deep connection?
Oh, that's a very tough question. Countries where I've lived in for a little bit longer time, they are deep in my heart. I started in Sudan and Bamako and Sierra Leone. Therefore, it's very hard. I always feel, and this is also now when I'm in Sierra Leone, I feel this is part of my home. Yeah? I feel really coming home. It's a little bit like that.
And the warmth of the sun or the stillness of the snow?
Sun.
You like the sun?
I also like the sun. All right. And of course, a very interesting moment there. And let's draw back into the conversation. And the big question now is, if development aid is not the solution, then what is?
And that's why it becomes tricky, Judge, because the answer isn't simple, and it doesn't depend on an individual to decide whether, it's something that should continue to benefit the people.
Yeah, and not to appear as if we are being simplistic, development aid is very important, and it can stabilize crisis. We've seen that happen before. It can save lives. It can even create opportunities.
But what it cannot do on its own, it cannot build strong institutions, it cannot fix governance or replace any political will.
Yeah, and I don't know how our listeners and viewers take it, and maybe that's where the real shift needs to happen, not just in how aid is delivered, but in how it is understood.
Because for a very long time, the narrative has been about how much money is spent instead of who holds the power over how the money is being used.
I like the way you putting it, like how the money is being used, and donor countries need to be more, transparent about the interests they have in, African nations.
Right, because I've always asked that question, George. If I keep giving you money for a particular objective, or you're giving money even to your wife at home to prepare food and you're not seeing food, or kids are hungry all the time, they are hungry. This is just a very simple example. Would I keep giving the money, or will you keep giving me the money? You
will question first before giving more. And we're talking about an organization that has been operating in Africa for the last 6 decades. I mean, they should have left, because you can only support to a certain extent.
Right.
So the question to Matthias was, how does he seize, aid if, it was reformed?
Poverty, hunger, inequality, these are all political issues. So first of all, I think it need to have a much more honest dialogue between the donors and the recipient of this kind of assistance. Yeah. Because in the end, the donor countries, they have to change their policies, their politics, to make their politics fairer, trade systems fairer, the whole financial system more fair. And I think also the poorer countries, they have to do their homework as well, fighting corruption, for example, being more accountable to the people in their country, stick to priorities such as investing 10% of their budget into agriculture, for example. What I see at the moment in the US, I can't see a lot of political will there. This is pure interest. There's pure interest. There is no solidarity at all. And with only interest, I think we will not really make progress.
So development aid has saved countless lives, and that cannot be ignored. But we are at a crossroads where we must be able to choose between charity and true partnership.
And what is true is that people don't want handouts. They want dignity and control over their own future.
So we want to hear from you out there. How can countries like Nigeria, Cameroon, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, Sudan move from dependency to true economic independence?
And is the current global aid system still fit for, purpose? Or is it time to completely rethink how development works?
So join the conversation in the comment section. We're always happy to hear from you. And if you value honest, thoughtful, or thought-provoking conversations like this, make sure that you follow us and share with your friends. Don't forget that.
Yes, of course, that is very important because we want you to be part of, these conversations that are shaping, the continent. Mm-hmm. And you can find us under the Baobab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course on our YouTube channel,
DW Africa, where you can simply subscribe as well. My name is Mefo,
and I am Okachi. Many thanks.